In the next section of Chapter 5 of Counsels and Maxims of the Ages of Life, Schopenhauer begins to discuss what life is like in our maturity after the age of 40, especially for the intellectually superior type of person. This is a group into which he obviously includes himself. He discusses the turn towards misanthropy among this type of person. Why is it that this person, as he ages, always tends to become a despiser of humanity? He also contrasts the cheerfulness of youth with the somberness of old age and provides what I think are some really fascinating reflections on the nature of time and memory and how those are experienced differently by the young and by the old. Here's what he writes. Intellectual superiority, even if it is of the highest kind, will not secure for a man a preponderating place in conversation until after he is 40 years old. For age and experience, though they can never be a substitute for intellectual talent, may far outweigh it. And even in a person of the meanest capacity, they give a certain counterpoise to the power of an extremely intellectual man, so long as the latter is young. Of course, I allude here to personal superiority, not to the place a man may gain by his works. So in this first paragraph, I think Schopenhauer is telling us that the very intelligent, very noble or superior character will not be manifest among other people in youth, because at that point those gifts are not apparent to everyone, and they will be washed out by skill and what does it say here? Skill and age and experience, right? So the young intellectual in competition with the older people who are not so intellectual will not compete well. But as he ages, this will become more manifest, as we'll see as we go on. And on passing his 40th year, any man of the slightest power of mind, any man, that is, who has more than the sorry share of intellect with which nature has endowed 5/6 of mankind, will hardly fail to show some trace of misanthropy. For, as is natural, he has by that time inferred other people's character from an examination of his own, with the result that he has been gradually disappointed to find that in the qualities of the head or in those of the heart, and usually in both, he reaches a level to which they do not attain. So he gladly avoids having anything more to do with them. Sounds very autobiographical if you know a bit about Schopenhauer. Okay? As the man of discernment and quality knows his own quality, he discovers through experience that the vast majority of mankind is not at his level, and he can only be the loser by close association with them. So he naturally becomes a misanthrope and withdraws into his own private circle in order to maintain his superiority. So going on. For it may be said in general that every man will love or hate solitude, in other words, his own society, just in proportion as he is worth anything in himself. Kant has some remarks upon this kind of misanthropy in his critique of the faculty of judgment. And here Schopenhauer gives a reference to that part of the third critique. I've looked it up, and perhaps I'll do a video about it later on. If I do, I'll link it up here right now. In a young man, it is a bad sign, as well from an intellectual as from a moral point of view, if he is precocious in understanding the ways of the world, and in adapting himself to its pursuits. If he at once knows how to deal with men, and enters upon life, as it were, fully prepared. It argues a vulgar nature. On the other hand, to be surprised and astonished at the way people act, and to be clumsy and cross-grained in having to do with them, indicates a character of a nobler sort. The cheerfulness and vivacity of youth are partly due to the fact that, when we are ascending the hill of life, death is not visible. It lies down at the bottom on the other side. But once we have crossed the top of the hill, death comes in view. Death, which until then was known to us only by hearsay. This makes our spirits droop, and from the same time we begin to feel that our vital powers are on the ebb. A grave seriousness now takes the place of that early extravagance of spirit. And the change is noticeable even in the expression of a man's face. As long as we are young, people may tell us what they please. We look upon life as endless and use our time recklessly. But the older we become, the more we practice economy. For towards the close of life, every day we live gives us the same kind of sensation as the criminal experiences on every step on his way to be tried. I don't know that I can improve on that paragraph by explanation. It's really well done, especially the sort of metaphor, as we say in English, of going over the hill and now death comes into sight. And what was before a sort of fun adventure with limitless possibilities now becomes, a sort of accelerating downhill slide as the spirit weakens and we see ourselves drawing closer to this ultimate goal, which is now quite evident to us, where it was concealed for us by the climb that we had ahead of us in our youth. Going back to Schopenhauer now. From the standpoint of youth, life seems to stretch away into an endless future. From the standpoint of old age, to go back but a little way into the past. So that at the beginning, life presents us with a picture in which the objects appear a great way off, as though we had reversed our telescope, while in the end, everything seems so close. To see how short life is, a man must have grown old, that is to say, he must have lived long. It's a great image here, right? That the young man sees the world as though he'd reversed his telescope. All of the objects of his longing are far off, right? He still perhaps is sort of enamored of this drive and this will and struggle, which Schopenhauer would say is what the wise man gives up as he becomes older. But life is endless, but everything also seems so far away. You have to work so hard. You have to sort of drive all your energy into it because that's the way life is, right? It stretches on into an endless future. Things look like they are, looking through the reversed telescope, close things seem far away. Just the reverse is the case for the older man, right? Everything seems up close. Instead of extending far into the future, the horizon of your life now is the present and whatever small portion of the past you can currently remember. We'll see Schopenhauer say more about memory in the paragraphs ahead. To see how short life is, a man must have grown old. He must have lived long. Continuing. On the other hand, as the years increase, things look smaller, one and all. And life, which had so firm and stable a base in the days of our youth, now seems nothing but a rapid flight of moments, every one of them illusory. We have come to see that the whole world is vanity. Time itself seems to go at a much slower pace when we are young. So that not only is the first quarter of life the happiest, it is also the longest of all. It leaves more memories behind it. If a man were put to it, he could tell you more out of the first quarter of his life than out of 2 of the remaining periods. Nay, in the spring of life, as in the spring of the year, the days reach a length that is positively tiresome. But in the autumn, whether of the year or of life, though they are short, they are more genial and uniform. But why is it that to an old man his past life appears so short? For this reason: his memory is short, and so he fancies that his life has been short too. He no longer remembers the insignificant parts of it, and much that was unpleasant is now forgotten. How little then there is left! We subtract the unpleasant parts of life, knowing Schopenhauer, we subtract 80%. For in general, a man's memory is as imperfect as his intellect, and he must make a practice of reflecting upon the lessons he has learned and the events he has experienced if he does not want them both to sink gradually into the gulf of oblivion. Now, we are unaccustomed to reflect upon matters of no importance, or as a rule upon things that we have found disagreeable, and yet that is necessary if the memory of them is to be preserved. But the class of things that may be called insignificant is continually receiving fresh additions. Much that wears an air of importance at first gradually becomes of no consequence at all from the fact of its frequent repetition, so that in the end we actually lose count of the number of times it happens. Hence, we are better able to remember the events of our early than of our later years. The longer we live, the fewer are the things that we can call important or significant enough to deserve further consideration, and by this alone can they be fixed in the memory. In other words, they are forgotten as soon as they are past. Thus it is that time runs on, leaving always fewer traces of its passage. So in this long paragraph, Schopenhauer has told us that the reason that life seems short to an old man, the reason why his time horizon is the present and maybe the past 3, 8, 10 years of his life, and then jumping all the way back to his memories of early life, with a lot of the intermediate stuff forgotten. Reason for that is the failure of memory. Reason for the failure of memory is a failure of attention. That because we do not attend to, give concentration to, and review things that are insignificant or things that are disagreeable, both of those things gradually fade. They sort of sink down into the swamp of memory and are lost finally forever. So that when you get to be an old man, you basically have vivid memories of youth and then memories of whatever part of the recent past that you've paid most attention to. Okay. As far as insignificant things, he says here, those are constantly growing in number. Things that you thought were significant gradually lapse into insignificance, and things that are repeated frequently become insignificant by repetition. You no longer pay attention to them, and so your memory of them declines. They sort of disappear from this overall sense of yourself that you compose in memory. Okay. Going on to the next paragraph now. Further, if disagreeable things have happened to us, we do not care to ruminate upon them, least of all when they touch our vanity, as is usually the case. For few misfortunes fall upon us for which we can be held entirely blameless. So people are very ready to forget many things that are disagreeable, as well as many that are unimportant. It is from this double cause that our memory is so short, and a man's recollection of what has happened always becomes proportionately shorter the more things that have occupied him in life. The things we did in years gone by, the events that happened long ago, are like those objects on the coast which, to the seafarer on his outward voyage, become smaller every minute, more unrecognizable, and harder to distinguish. Again, it sometimes happens that memory and imagination will call up some long past scene as vividly as if it had occurred only yesterday, so that the event in question seems to stand very near to the present time. The reason of this is that it is impossible to call up all the intervening period in the same vivid way, as there is no one figure pervading it which can be taken in at a glance. And besides, most of the things that happened in that period are forgotten, and all that remains of it is the general knowledge that we have lived through it, a mere notion of abstract existence, not a direct vision of some particular experience. It is this that causes some single event of long ago to appear as though it took place but yesterday. The intervening time vanishes, and the whole of life looks incredibly short. Nay, there are occasional moments in old age when we can scarcely believe that we are so advanced in years, or that the long past lying behind us has had any real existence, a feeling which is mainly due to the circumstance that the present always seems fixed and immovable as we look at it. These and similar mental phenomena are ultimately to be traced to the fact that it is not our nature in itself, but only the outward presentation of it, that lies in time, and that the present is the point of contact between the world as subject and the world as object. Footnote, translator's footnote. By this remark, Schopenhauer means the will, which, as he argues, forms the inner reality underlying all the phenomena of life and nature, is not in itself affected by time, but that, on the other hand, time is necessary for the objectification of the will, for the will as presented in the passing phenomena of the world. Time is thus definable as the condition of change, and the present time is as the only point of contact between reality and appearance. So there's some interesting metaphysical stuff there about Schopenhauer's theory of the will as the kind of underlying sort of noumenal reality of all of life, of the self, and then its presentation and its objectification, moving from subject to object. We talked a bit about that in the previous video. I don't want to get into that too deeply because I want to go back over this idea about the memory, the idea of a vivid memory in old age. If you're old, you might be, let's say, 55, 60 years old, and suddenly the memory of something you did, maybe something embarrassing you did in ninth grade, comes back to you, and it's just as vivid and crystal clear as if it had happened, last week. Why would that be? The reason Schopenhauer says is because the intervening, 45 years have just disappeared. You can't call those to mind along with the memory. The memory itself is present, and then there's the you of the present, and the two things are, as it were, kind of adjacent in your mind. And so you feel as just last week you were doing that horribly embarrassing thing, and you're even embarrassed, but even sort of your emotional life today, now as a 60-year-old man, is affected by this recollection, this sort of sudden vivid recollection deprived of the intervening time, which has of course been subject to this sort of gradual sinking into the mud that happens to things in our past that we don't pay attention to, that we aren't mindful of, and devoted to paying attention to, analyzing, and recollecting. So that what we have is, again, the old man, it seems, lives a kind of truncated past. Whatever amount of the past he can remember, all of it's sort of gradually fading away. So we'll go on to the end of this section now. Again, why is it that in youth we can see no end to the years that lie before us? Because we are obliged to find room for all the things we hope to attain in life. We cram the years so full of projects that if we were to try to carry them all out, death would come prematurely, though we reached the age of Methuselah. Another reason why life looks so long when we are young is that we are apt to measure its length by the few years we have already lived. In those early years, things are new to us, and so they appear important. We dwell upon them after they have happened, and often call them to mind, and thus in youth life seems replete with incident, and therefore of long duration. We might say that the young man's life is very densely packed with activities and plans and ambitions and objects of desire, more than he could possibly ever hope to achieve, but they all sort of lie within the sort of horizon of his personality, of his objects, as objects of his intention, of his striving. And even things he's just done, right? He turns them over in memory. This life is full of, like a chest full of jewels for the young person. Okay, going on. Sometimes we credit ourselves with a longing to be in some distant spot, whereas in truth we are only longing to have the time back again which we spent there, days when we were younger and fresher than we are now. In those moments, time mocks us by wearing the mask of space. And if we travel to the spot, we can see how much we have been deceived. That's the end of the section I'm going to read for you today. And I love that image there, that when we have a longing in time wearing the mask of space. I have a longing to be in a certain place. I might say, I'm unhappy with my life now. I wish I were back on the beach in Mexico. This is what's happening here is I go back to the beach in Mexico now as an older man. And I get there and I look around and I say, I guess I didn't want the beach at all. What I wanted was to be 29 on the beach. I want the time, the life, the years that I spent on the beach. I want that, but I can't have that. Schopenhauer's expression there is fantastic. Right? That's time mocking me, wearing the mask of space. It's like, you really want this place again, don't you? And I really don't. What I really want is, I want 1985 again, or whatever the time period was. So that's that's the concluding section of the concluding paragraph of this section, beginning to deal with old age, with maturity, still contrasted with youth, explaining why the memories of our youth remain vivid, while the memories of, say, 10, 20 years ago fade away as we get older. So hope you enjoyed that, especially those reflections upon the nature of time and memory. We'll look at the next section of the ages of life in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.